Welcome everybody. This is Bull Runner Manassas 160. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. I'm Gary Edelman. That's Andy Poulton behind the camera there. And I think we're at an area that a lot of people have heard of and a lot of people have passed by, but maybe not actually come out to. You know, I'll bet you a lot of you all watching, sorry, y'all watching if you prefer, might have been out here before. We are at Sudley Springs Ford. Not Sudley Ford. Sudley Ford crosses Bull Run off to my left, I don't know, 400 or 500 yards. Sudley Springs Ford is not over Bull Run, but rather over the run you can see behind me, or through the run you can see behind me, Catharpin Run. It looks like Catharpin, and indeed the Catharpin Run in Fredericksburg is pronounced that way. This one is Catharpin Run, okay? In other words, the Union Army on their big flank march after they, turned off before the Stone Bridge and did their 8, 10, 12, 17 mile march over this way, depending on which numbers you use, is going to first cross Bull Run at Sudley Ford and then cross Sudley Springs Ford here at Catharpin Run, and then they can emerge upon Matthews Hill a mile behind the camera. Now, the reason a lot of people do come out here is not only because it's nice and peaceful, but because one of the more famous photos of the Civil War was taken here in March of 1862. Here you have this very spot, Catharpin Run. Here you have 4 kids of the Thornberry family. At least a few of them are from the Thornberry family, and which house still stands, slightly altered, not a couple hundred yards behind the camera. Then you also have the Union sort of cavalry or horsemen seemingly facing off against 2 Confederate-clad children, some of the most photographed children of the entire Civil War. There's at least 7 or 8, if not more, photos of these kids, especially these 2, in their small Confederate uniforms around this area of Sudley. Sudley could boast, in 1861, 1 or 2, a church, a ford, the railroad was starting to come through, a mill, something that was called a mansion, and it was a bunch of scattered buildings. It was by no means a big going concern, but it was up and coming. To orient you here, we were at the Stone Bridge before, Washington D.C., 30 miles off in that direction. This is the Stone Bridge and this is Bull Run. Bull Run eventually curves around this way off the north of this map here, and that's where we are at Sudley, okay? If we were to go way north, we'd eventually arrive in Leesburg, Virginia, okay? Richmond is another 70 or 80 miles south of here, okay? So we're up here somewhere, and the Union Army's trying to go here, and so they do, and emerge behind the Confederates, okay, on Matthews Hill. The Southerners leave the Stone Bridge and bring troops over to Matthews Hill, and then they bring more soldiers into the fight. Let's not pay attention to any of this stuff yet, okay? That's a little general orientation here. The soldiers talked about Sudley. This Battle of Bull Run, or Battle of Manassas, was of course fought on a Sunday. That's somewhat famous because it was said Stonewall Jackson preferred to fight on Sundays here, as if he did the battle himself. He does get a lot of credit. One Union soldier, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, he's from the 2nd Rhode Island, and by the way, the Rhode Island troops under Ambrose Burnside, brigade commander, they're in the van, they're in the lead at this point. And he says, one of the soldiers, a guy named Woodbury, says, "What a toilsome march it was through the woods, what wearisome work in clearing away the fallen trees, which now and then obstructed the path." Interrupting for a sec, that's the worst thing you can do to troops according to them. Stop and go, stop and go. And when they stop, the troops behind them and them and them stop. And the fastest people to get to their points here at Bull Run for the Union Army were only an hour late. That was the best of them. Many were several hours late. The artillery could be moved, but with difficulty. Colonel Hunter, who was lame, proceeded in a carriage. Other vehicles were along with civilians who wished to see the battle. The march was necessarily low, and it was not slow, and it was not until 9 o'clock that the head of the column emerged from the woods and came out upon a comparatively good farm road, along which were scattered a few comfortable-looking houses about a mile from Sudley Ford. That's here. The inhabitants of the neighborhood were out, dressed in their Sunday clothes, apparently preparing to go to church. But the little building, which has become historical as Sudley Church, was a witness was to witness no worship that day. By the time usually assigned for the beginning of the service, it had become a hospital and was filled with wounded and dying men. In both battles, 1st Manassas, 2nd Manassas, Sudley Church became a hospital. The altar became an operating table. The area around it was scattered with wounded soldiers, and of course, because it's a hospital, there are graves around it as well. And we might be able to cover that somewhat in another video. But for now, here we are on the morning of July 21st, and you've got Hunter's division, followed by Heinzelman's division coming up in this direction, right? And Hunter has the Rhode Islanders in the front. There's Porter's brigade. You've got some U.S. regulars in there, the ones who are in the actual U.S. regular units, not the volunteer units. They're coming up as well, and they're going to bump into Confederates on Matthews Hill. But when they crossed here it is, the nice, beautiful water of Cat Harpin Run. They go in to fill their canteens. That muddies up the water, so then the regiments behind them have cloudy water to drink. But on this day, as the day got hotter, Union and Confederate soldiers both talked about drinking water that was not ideal. Some of it blood tinged. They actually went and got water from where it looked a little bit less red. I mean, when you're thirsty, you'll drink anything. Ask some of the soldiers on a really hot day after, marching as they were unaccustomed, okay? So they slowed down. There's blackberries around here. They're eating blackberries. They're coming along, and we'll head down real quick to this area to get a closer look. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're at Sudley Springs Ford, at Bull Runner, Manassas. And this is Cat Harpin Run. The camera is facing north. I am looking south. So you've got a slowdown going on here, but by the time more Union soldiers were coming across, Union soldiers were starting to fall back to this area toward the Sudley Hospital. The church is not far behind us here. I actually have a picture that I can show you, if only I can find it well enough. This is a picture taken from almost near where we are standing now and looking back toward the church. Let me point out something here. We are standing right here where the wagon is, or roughly so, on the bank, and you can see Sudley Church in the background there. You can also see the spring structure of Sudley Springs Ford, for which it is named. Now, you might recall in the picture we already showed you that there was, that spring structure is also right there. And one of the coolest things when you come down here, beside being able to be where the Union soldiers crossed, is to see the remnant of the spring house structure. You can see those stones sort of tumbled down. You can trace in the 1880s and then in the 1930s and 1940s pictures of that spring structure slowly dilapidating over the years. We actually still have some remnant of it over there. That's private property on the other side. This is National Park Service property over here, okay? So you can imagine Union soldiers coming up here. You can imagine wounded Union soldiers coming back in this direction. And at the back of this whole line are going to be the least prepared soldiers who could possibly arrive on the battlefield on a hot day like this, the soldiers from New England. They're from Maine, they're from Vermont, they're under Oliver Otis Howard, and they're in the back. They're dealing with the hottest part of the day as they're going to try to reach the battlefield. Now, you know things aren't going to go well for the Union, and I think I told you in another video that the Union retreated whence they came. And that means that most of the Union Army retreated back this way. This happens in battle. This isn't, you don't have some sort of a Google or Apple map telling you the best way to go back. You retreated where you came from, right? That's also where your supply services are, where your hospitals might be. So they're going to come back this way. The Confederates are going to follow, and what do they find? Good, clean water, somewhat clean water, and blackberries. That slows the Confederates down. Ultimately, the Southerners will be just as disorganized in victory as the Union will be in retreat. So the Union leaves this area. By the way, I would still contend probably the busiest day in the history of Sudley, unless you count the traffic that just rampantly cruises along this road nowadays. But as far as foot traffic, I can't see how it would have ever been exceeded since then. Now, during the Battle of Second Manassas, or Second Bull Run, the Confederate Army is going to take position along generally a railroad bed that just about reaches all the way to Sudley. And then this area will see additional activity, something we'll cover in another video. So, Andy, anything I missed here?
I don't think so, Gary. We're ready to go to the next stop.
Great. Thanks, Andy. We hope you enjoyed our little visit here to Sudley Springs Ford on Cat Harpin Run. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for supporting battlefield preservation and education.